the thump below the crimson current. The monsoon rain hammered against the tin roof of my grandmother's house, a frantic, deafening rhythm that should have been comforting. It was the sound of my childhood, the sound of life being washed clean. But tonight, it couldn't drown out the silence. An unnatural, heavy silence where the chorus of frogs and the shrill orchestra of cicadas should have been. It was a void in the world, a space waiting to be filled by something else. I sat on the thin mattress on the floor, the bamboo walls of the stilted home offering little protection from the humid night air. Through the gaps I could see the river, our river, the lifeblood of this small village in Kampong Cam. But it wasn't the familiar muddy brown I remembered. Under the weak sliver of a new moon fighting its way through the thick storm clouds, the water glowed. It was a sickly, coppery red, like old blood diluted in water. The current, usually so swift and powerful during the rains, was sluggish and thick, as if the river itself was struggling to breathe. And then I heard it. A low, percussive thump, thump, it echoed from the depths, a sound that vibrated up through the wooden stilts of the house and into the soles of my feet. It wasn't the sound of a drifting log knocking against the supports. This was different. This was rhythmic, deliberate. It was the sound of something ancient, something impossibly large, waking from a long and resentful slumber. The air, already heavy with the familiar smells of wet earth and decaying jungle foliage, now carried a new scent. It was a sharp, metallic tang that coated the back of my throat and made my teeth ache. I pulled my krama tighter around my shoulders, a useless gesture against a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. Out on the crimson water, an empty fishing boat bobbed gently. It belonged to Ta Sok, the old fisherman who lived 2 houses down. His mooring rope, thick and sturdy, was not untied. It was severed, the frayed end swaying in the unnatural current like a beckoning finger, inviting someone to see what lay beneath. My name is Kiri. I am a graphic designer. I live in a modern apartment in Phnom Penh, a world of air conditioning, high-speed internet, and the constant, reassuring noise of traffic. I had come back to my grandmother's village to escape that noise, to find some peace after a difficult project. I came looking for the familiar sounds of my youth, for the comforting embrace of tradition. But the tradition I found was not the one I was looking for. I had arrived only 3 days earlier. The afternoon sun was warm and golden, filtering through the leaves of the giant mango trees that shaded the village. My grandmother, my Yi, greeted me with a smile that crinkled the corners of her eyes. Her hands, though gnarled with age, were still strong as she grasped mine. "Kiri, my boy," she'd said, her voice raspy with affection. "You are too thin, the city is eating you. Come, I have made your favorite Bai Sach Krauk." The smells of her house were a balm to my soul. The smoky scent of the charcoal stove, the pungent aroma of fermenting prahak in its clay pot, the sweet fragrance of jasmine she'd placed in a small bowl of water on the table. For 2 days, everything was perfect. I helped her mend fishing nets, listened to her stories of the old days, and fell asleep to the familiar symphony of the Cambodian night. But on the 3rd evening the rain came, and with it the silence. Yi had grown quiet as the sky darkened. She lit extra incense at the small spirit house, the Rian Tevita, that stood in our yard. Her lips moved in a silent prayer, her brow furrowed with a worry that seemed deeper than just a coming storm. When I asked her what was wrong, she just shook her head. "The river is not happy, child," she whispered, turning away from me to stare out at the water. "Be sure you latch the door tightly tonight, and do not look out no matter what you hear." Her words, which I would have dismissed as village superstition back in my city life, now felt like lead weights in my stomach. And as I sat there, listening to that horrifying, methodical thumping from the deep, I understood. This was not a storm. This was a visitation. The night dragged on, each thump from the river a beat of a terrifying heart. I didn't sleep. How could I? I kept my eyes fixed on the gaps in the wall, watching that malevolent red glow. The rain eventually softened to a drizzle, but the silence of the frogs and cicadas remained absolute. The thumping, however, seemed to grow louder, closer. It felt as if it was coming from directly beneath the house now. Thump, thump. The entire structure vibrated with each beat. The water in the clay drinking pot on the table rippled in perfect, concentric circles. I imagined a colossal fist, miles below the riverbed, striking upwards, testing the fragile crust of the earth. Thump, thump. I could feel it in my bones, a resonant frequency that made my own heart pound in a panicked, offbeat rhythm against it. I thought of Yi's warning, do not look out. But the morbid curiosity, the city dwellers' need for a rational explanation, was a powerful urge. My mind was racing, trying to find a logical cause. An underwater landslide, some strange seismic activity, a forgotten piece of wartime machinery finally dislodged by the current. But the metallic smell, the blood-red water, the severed rope of Ta Sok's boat, no scientific explanation felt adequate. It felt personal. It felt angry. Finally, just before the first hint of dawn was set to break the horizon, the thumping stopped, just like that. The silence that followed was somehow even more terrifying. I held my breath, waiting. A minute passed, then another. Slowly, tentatively, the first brave cricket began to chirp. Then another. And soon, the familiar, comforting sounds of the night jungle returned, as if a spell had been broken. I must have drifted into an exhausted sleep then, because I was woken by the sound of voices. Urgent, worried voices. I stumbled to the door and unlatched it. The sun was up, but the sky was a bruised gray color. The river was no longer red. It was a murky, turbulent brown, swollen from the rain, but the metallic smell lingered faintly in the air. A small crowd of villagers was gathered on the riverbank, near where Ta Sok's boat was now wedged against a cluster of water hyacinths. His wife was weeping, held by two other women. The village chief, a stern-faced man named Bong Min, was talking in low tones to a few of the younger men. Yi was standing at the edge of our porch, her face a mask of grim resignation. "What happened?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "Ta Sok is gone," she said, not looking at me. "His boat was found empty. They say he went to check his fish traps before the storm got bad." But we both knew that wasn't the whole story. The severed rope told a different tale. Something had not just untied his boat, something had taken it, and him with it. Over the next few days, a heavy blanket of fear settled over the village. No one went near the river after dusk. The fishermen pulled their boats far up onto the bank, some refusing to go out at all, even in the bright light of day. The usual laughter of children playing by the water's edge was gone, replaced by a tense, watchful quiet. I tried to talk to people to understand what was happening, but my questions were met with shaken heads and averted eyes. They would mutter about the Neek, the great serpentine spirits of the water, or about angry ancestors. It was clear they believed something supernatural was at work, but they were too afraid to name it. My city-bred skepticism was at war with the primal fear I'd felt that night. I needed answers. I decided to do some investigating of my own. I started with Ta Sok's empty boat. Bong Min let me look at it. The rope was the most disturbing part. It wasn't cut with a knife. The fibers were torn and shredded, as if pulled apart by immense, brute force. On the side of the small wooden boat, just below the waterline, were 3 long, deep gouges in the wood. They were spaced evenly apart, each one as thick as my arm. It looked like the boat had been scraped by a giant rake, or a claw. That evening, I pressed my grandmother for more information. We sat together as she sorted dried chilies, the sharp scent filling the small room. "Yi," I began, trying to sound casual, "these stories about the river spirits, what do you really believe?" She stopped her work and looked at me, her dark eyes searching my face. "It is not a matter of belief, Kiri. It is a matter of respect. We live beside the river, we take from it, we must also give back. Our ancestors understood this. They made pacts. They kept the balance." "What kind of pacts?" She sighed, a long, weary sound. "There are things that sleep in the deep places, ancient things. They were here long before our villages, long before the great temples of Angkor were even a dream. They are guardians, but they are also hungry. Our ancestors knew what they wanted. They knew what to offer. And what was that? I asked, leaning forward. She shook her head, picking up the chilies again. It is better not to speak of it. The young people, they have forgotten. They build their new concrete docks, they throw their plastic waste in the water, their boat motors are loud and disrespectful. They have forgotten how to listen. So the river has decided to remind them. Her words sent another shiver down my spine. The new dock. A small, ugly concrete structure had been built a few months ago, just upstream. It was a local government project, meant to make it easier for trade boats to dock. The villagers had been proud of it, a sign of progress. Now it seemed like it might have been a terrible mistake. The next day I walked upriver to the new dock. It was deserted. The concrete was already stained with algae. I stood at its edge, staring down into the murky water. I felt like I was being watched. A cold, malevolent intelligence was sizing me up from the depths. I remembered something Yi had said about balance. We take, but we must also give back. What had the villagers taken? And what did the river now demand in return? I decided to search for a place the ancestors might have used for their offerings. I pushed my way through the thick jungle that bordered the riverbank, the humid air thick with the buzzing of insects. After an hour of searching, I found it. It was almost completely swallowed by the jungle. A massive banyan tree, its aerial roots draping down like the petrified tentacles of some great beast, had grown around a small stone shrine. The stones were covered in moss and lichen, but I could still make out faint carvings on them. They were not the graceful Apsara dancers or serene Buddhas I was used to seeing. These were different. They depicted people, their faces contorted in fear, making offerings to a shape that rose from the water. The shape was indistinct, eroded by centuries of monsoon rains, but it was clear that it was enormous. It had a long, serpentine body, but also what looked like multiple powerful limbs ending in massive claws. The carvings showed the villagers giving it livestock, baskets of fruit, and something else. In one particularly disturbing panel, a small, bound figure was being lowered into the water. My blood ran cold. This was the pact Yi spoke of, a pact paid in sacrifice. Inside the crumbling shrine, I found remnants of recent offerings, not from the villagers but from my grandmother. A few sticks of burnt-out incense, a small bowl with the dried remains of some rice, a few wilted jasmine flowers. She hadn't forgotten. She had been trying in her own small way to keep the peace, but it was not enough. That night the sliver of the moon was gone, hidden by a thick, starless blanket of cloud. The air was unnaturally still and heavy. Even before the rain began, I knew it was going to happen again. Yi was quiet, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She didn't even bother with dinner. "It is the dark of the moon," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "It is when its hunger is greatest." As if on cue, the first fat drops of rain began to spatter against the tin roof, and with the rain, the silence returned. The world outside our small house went completely dead, and then the thumping started. Thump, thumpy, thump. It was louder this time, more insistent. The house groaned with each impact. The metallic smell was back, stronger than before, so thick it was almost a taste. I rushed to the gaps in the wall and looked out. The river was a horrifying, incandescent red. It wasn't just glowing, it seemed to be lit from within, a river of molten copper, and it was no longer sluggish. The current was churning, violent, with whirlpools forming and collapsing on the surface. "Yi, what is it?" I pleaded, turning to her. "What is down there?" Her face was pale in the flickering light of our single kerosene lamp. Tears streamed down her wrinkled cheeks. "They call it Kram Akara," she finally said, her voice trembling. "The entity below the current. It is not a Neek. It is older. It is the river's rage given form. For generations, my family were its keepers. We knew the rituals, the offerings that would keep it sleeping. A tribute of metal once a year on the dark of the moon. Old tools, bronze bells, things from the earth. to remind it of the weight of the land, to keep it bound to the deep places. She took a shaky breath. "But my father, your great-grandfather," he refused. "He said it was a dark practice. He was a devout Buddhist. He tried to seal the shrine. The Kram Akara took him, and the village, they were too scared. The pact was broken. For 60 years it has slumbered." But the new dock, the steel pylons driven deep into the riverbed, it is like they hammered on the door of its tomb. They woke it up, and now it wants more than metal. It wants what was taken from it. It wants a life. Thump, thumpy, thump. The sound was right beneath us now. The floorboards rattled. A clay pot fell from a shelf and shattered on the floor. I grabbed Yi's arm. Her whole body was shaking. "We have to leave," I yelled over the noise. "We can run, go to the next village." "There is nowhere to run, Kiri," she cried, her eyes wide with terror. "Its domain is the water, and in the monsoon season everything is water." She was right. Our house, like all the others, was an island in a rising sea of mud and floodwater. The river was everywhere. A colossal impact struck the house from below. It wasn't a thump anymore. It was a blow. The whole structure lurched violently to one side. I was thrown to the floor, pulling Yi down with me. The kerosene lamp smashed, plunging us into near-total darkness, save for the hellish red glow from outside. I scrambled back to the wall, my heart hammering against my ribs. I had to see. I had to know what we were facing. I peered through the gap, my eyes straining against the gloom. Something was breaking the surface of the churning, red water. It wasn't a head. It was a limb, a long, segmented limb, the color of river mud and old rust. It was impossibly huge, easily as thick as the trunk of a coconut tree. It rose slowly, water and red silt sluicing from its chitinous-looking surface. It ended in 3 enormous, hooked claws that gleamed a dull, wet black in the eerie light. The very same claws that had gouged Ta Sok's boat. It felt for the stilts of our house, its movements slow, deliberate, and full of ancient, patient menace. It found one of the main supports and wrapped its claws around it. The thick timber, which had stood for 50 years, groaned and splintered under the pressure. Then another limb rose, and another. The Kram Akara was pulling itself up from the depths, using our home as a ladder. I was paralyzed by a fear so profound it felt like my soul was trying to leave my body. This was not a spirit. This was a physical thing, a creature from a forgotten age of monsters. My modern, rational mind completely shattered, leaving only primal terror in its wake. Yi began to chant, a low, desperate Buddhist prayer for protection. Her voice was a tiny, fragile thread against the crushing sound of splintering wood and the monstrous presence that was trying to tear our home apart. The limb tightened its grip. The whole house tilted again, more steeply this time. I could hear things sliding across the floor in the darkness, clattering and breaking. We were going to be pulled into the water. We were going to be fed to the thing below. In that moment of pure desperation, an idea sparked in my mind. The tribute, a tribute of metal. It wanted metal. "Yi," I screamed. "The offerings, what did they give it?" "Tools, plowshares, bells," she sobbed. My eyes darted around the dark room. We had nothing like that. Just wooden furniture, clay pots, woven baskets. My gaze fell upon my backpack, slumped in the corner. My laptop, my camera, my power bank, my metal watch, my city life. It was all full of metal. With a surge of adrenaline, I scrambled across the tilting floor to my bag. My hands shook so badly I could barely work the zippers. I pulled out my expensive laptop, my lifeline to my work and my world in Phnom Penh. Without a second thought, I hurled it through the widest gap in the wall. It hit the red water with a splash that was instantly swallowed by the churning chaos. I waited. The pressure on the stilt didn't lessen. The groaning of the wood grew louder. It wasn't enough. I grabbed my camera, my lenses, my spare batteries. I threw them out. Then my phone, my stainless steel water bottle, anything I could find that was metal. I tore the watch from my wrist and flung it into the darkness. Still, the creature held on. The house tilted further. I could hear the river water lapping just below the floorboards now. We were seconds away from being torn from our foundations. Then I remembered one last thing. In a small side pocket of my bag was a gift I had brought for Yi. It was a small, heavy, solid bronze statue of a smiling Buddha I had bought from a market near the royal palace. It was supposed to bring her peace and good fortune. I fumbled for it, my fingers closing around the cool, heavy metal. It felt solid, real, a tiny anchor in a world that had gone mad. For a moment, I hesitated. It was an image of peace, of enlightenment. To throw it to a thing of such darkness felt like a profound sacrilege. But Yi's chanting was growing weaker. I could hear the fear choking her. I crawled to the wall, held the heavy statue in my hand, and screamed out into the storm. "Take it, this is all we have. Take it and leave us be." I threw it with all my strength. It sailed through the air in a high arc and landed in the river with a surprisingly loud plunk. For a long moment, nothing happened. The house continued to groan. The claws remained clamped to our support. I thought, we are dead. And then slowly, miraculously, the pressure lessened. The great clawed limb unfurled. It slid back from the stilt and slipped beneath the surface of the red water. The other limbs followed, one by one, retreating back into the depths from which they came. The house settled with a final, shuddering groan. The thumping did not return. We stayed huddled together in the darkness for what felt like an eternity, listening. The rain began to soften, and just as before, the first cricket chirped. Then a frog croaked. The sounds of life rushed back in to fill the void. By the time the gray light of dawn filtered through the walls, the river was its normal, muddy brown. The metallic smell was gone. The next day, the village chief and a group of elders came to our house. They had found the bronze Buddha statue. It was sitting on the steps of the old, forgotten shrine, perfectly placed in the center. The water had receded, leaving it there as a sign. An agreement had been reached. That week I watched as the villagers, led by Bong Min and my grandmother, performed an old, long-forgotten ceremony at the shrine. They brought offerings, not life, but metal. Old farm tools, broken engine parts, rusty bicycle frames, anything they could find. They piled it before the banyan tree, burning incense and chanting prayers of apology and respect. They were restoring the balance. I left for Phnom Penh 2 days later. My Yi hugged me tightly at the bus stop. "You are a good boy, Kiri," she said. "You remembered the old ways even when you did not know them." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that everything was okay now, that the horror was over. Life in the city returned to normal. I bought a new laptop, a new phone. I drowned myself in work, in the noise and the light and the logic of my world. I tried to convince myself that what I had experienced was a nightmare, a hallucination brought on by the storm and the strange atmosphere of the village. But sometimes, late at night, when the city is quiet, and the only sound is the hum of the air conditioner and the gurgle of water moving through the pipes in the walls of my apartment building, I hear it. It's very faint, so faint that if I move or breathe too loudly, I can't be sure it's there at all. But it is. A low, deep, percussive sound, vibrating through the structure of the building. Thump thump. It is the sound of something ancient and deliberate. And I know, with a certainty that freezes the blood in my veins, that it is no longer just in the river. It's in the water, all the water. It has my scent now. It remembers the tribute I paid. And I know that it is patient. It can wait. So let me offer you this warning. If you ever find yourself by a quiet, forgotten stretch of water, and the world around you suddenly goes silent, if the air fills with a strange, metallic tang, and the water seems to take on a color it should not have, do not be curious. Do not look for a rational explanation. Show your respect and leave, because some things that slumber in the deep should never be woken, and some debts, once they are called due, can never be fully repaid.